it becomes apparent that appropriation, mimicry, quotation, allusion, and sublimated collaboration consist in a kind of sine qua non of the creative act, cutting across all forms and genres in the realm of cultural production. In this quote, Lethem is arguing that using the ideas and texts of others is a necessary part of the artistic process. Sine qua non means absolutely necessary to. Appropriation, mimicry, etc. are absolutely necessary to the creative act. Simply put, Jonathan Lethem, in The Ecstasy of Influence, is arguing that all art borrows ideas and materials from the art that came before it. Some people, including writers, hate this idea because they believe it devalues art. If new art is just remixed or appropriated versions of old art, what's the point? They might ask. But this attitude assumes that original art is good or better. Lethem disagrees. The idea is so unpopular because it undermines the presumed motivation for artistic creativity. If new art is just a remixed or appropriated version of old art, what is going to motivate new work? How can an artist claim the right to be paid for the work that others can take and change into something else if they want to? But this line of thinking assumes the main value of art lies in its profit potential. Again, Lethem disagrees, calling art a gift. Rather than denying and fighting artistic influences in these ways, Lethem wants artists to embrace the influences that go into their making of new art and writing. When we embrace the beautiful way in which ideas influence each other and lead to other creative ideas, Lethem says we can participate in the real value and enjoyment of art and its exchange of ideas. The title of his essay is The Ecstasy of Influence. This is a play on and reversal of a famous concept by Harold Bloom, the anxiety of influence. Bloom claimed that most artists and writers were anxious about being influenced by the great artists and writers before them, afraid of being seen as merely imitating those artists, as a lesser version of them. How can I write a good play after Shakespeare, or paint a good painting after Van Gogh, you might ask? That shadow of influence, Bloom thought, is what drives writers and artists to be original, different, new, trying to separate themselves from their artistic influences. But Lethem changes anxiety to ecstasy. Rather than seeing the influence as a negative thing, he thinks it is a good thing, even the best thing, or the whole point. Taking what others have done and making it new by doing it again in a different way, that to Lethem is the joy, the gift, the point of art and writing. Now let me step back and try to set up a bit of context for Lethem's article. In 2020, we're now 20 years after Napster, which was a sharing and pirating site that transformed the music landscape forever. Copyright lawyers, internet freedom fighters, and academic professors have been debating the ethics and responsibility of copyright laws ever since. Should the copy and paste function that the internet offers to artists be forbidden as antithetical to the artistic economy? If we allow copying, aren't we essentially endorsing pirating and plagiarism? And if we do permit this, then are artists going to be paid for their work? These difficult questions led to the cultural debate about intellectual property, content sharing, and forms of copying and appropriating intellectual property that the internet made possible in a new way. This is where Lethem steps in. Not only does he think those who equate artistic value with originality and profit are confused about how art works, he also points out that our rich artistic cultural heritage, from William Shakespeare to William Burroughs, is just a collection of plagiarized works. If these are examples of plagiarism, then we want more plagiarism, Lethem writes. In other words, Lethem is saying, let's admit that plagiarism happens all the time, inevitably, and move on to the more important question of how we borrow responsibly and in a manner that promotes a healthy and creative artistic community. What's remarkable about Lethem's article is not simply that he eloquently elucidates his argument, but the creative way he matches his method to his point. Did you notice that most of the article is made up of quotes from other texts? In his key to the article at the very end, Lethem notes that he literally quoted, without quotation marks, most of his sentences. Not only does he lift sentences from sources without properly quoting them, he even admits that he changed some of them to fit his paragraphs. This is basically intentional plagiarism to make a point. Lethem is walking the talk. He's acknowledging by using the sentences of other writers that he's not coming up with these ideas himself. And at the same time, he's changing the sources and making them his own, using them to make a new point, his own point. Why did I ask you to read this article, to think about this issue? 2 reasons. First, there are strong parallels between artistic activity, the kind that Lethem is talking about, and academic writing. Indeed, we might even think of them as kind of the same thing. In scholarship, we are less concerned, at least theoretically, with legal issues of copyright and more with clear record keeping. Even though we are not writing a research essay in this course or practicing citations, I want you to think about citations for a moment. Academic researchers value knowing where ideas come from because tracing the line of influence can lead to interesting discoveries and connections, almost like tracing a family line on a genealogy chart. It's all part of a grand project, that of finding out more about human beings and the world we live in. When we cite a source in an academic paper, we are helping with this project. Sometimes an academic essay is spoken of as if it can be divided into the ideas of the sources and the writer's original own ideas. But Lethem presents a strong objection to this model. What really is an original idea? I believe Lethem is absolutely right that ideas never arise in a vacuum, but rather from the influential ideas of others, what Lethem calls the chaos of cultural signs. So our division of ideas into borrowed and new is a false one. In the real world, academics recognize that one scholar's contribution to an idea is minuscule and that knowledge evolves incrementally. In fact, good record keeping and citation helps make these small steps forward possible. So you might think about citation as a way of pointing to specific texts that have played a key role in your work. That is to say, you might cite a handful of sources if you were writing an academic paper that you specifically quoted for your project, while the dozens or hundreds of other sources, less directly influential, lurking in the background of your ideas, go uncited. For instance, to write a history paper on World War II presumes you know something about modern history more generally, but you would not be likely to acknowledge the modern history books you've read in high school that made it possible for you to write your college essay on a single war. Nevertheless, those other sources played a role. So citation is never a complete record of your influences, but it is a useful key for your reader, a roadmap to help her find the most important texts related to your thoughts. That might not seem like what's happening when you're grinding out the technicalities of an actual citation, but when you look at the system from a bird's eye view, you can see, perhaps, the way scholars give credit to each other through citation actually enables them to borrow each other's work openly and freely for the betterment of everyone, without fear of being penalized, if we are transparent and honest in our borrowing. That is to say, giving credit to others promotes the gift economy that Lethem is talking about. That's why it's worth the time and effort to cite well when you are doing academic writing, research-based writing. This kind of honor system, if you want to think of it that way, applies to the artistic community as well. As a writer, Lethem says he's happy to give his work away as a gift. All he asks in exchange is for a little bit of gratitude and maybe some monetary support. Acknowledging those whose influences have been most direct to us is a way to do this. And Lethem does this by including the key to his article. Secondly, I want you to think about this article because it describes the kind of artistic activity and influences that are important to the kind of writing you'll be doing for your final project starting next week. In your final project, I'm going to invite or actually require you to steal, quote unquote, the art and writing of other artists because, as you'll see, the whole point of the genre you'll be working in is to take things from other people and do something interesting with them. The writers who work in that genre that you'll be working in do it on purpose. It's a complicated and wonderful way that they do it, in a way that takes old things and gives them away in a new form, in the gift economy that Lethem is talking about. We'll explore this genre and the assignment next week. But for now, just go to the forum, participate in the discussion about this article by Friday. See you there.